My name is T. Aaron Cisco. I am a speculative fiction or science fiction writer. More specifically, I'm a Afrofuturism author. The stories that I tell, the books that I write, are done so through the lens of my experiences as a Black American. Uh, my latest book is called Rod, String, Nail, Cloth, and it's sort of the culmination of everything that I've been trying to do throughout the majority of my adult and even young life. When I started writing, I did so because I loved the medium. I love to express myself through prose, especially through fiction. Um, but was always unsure about where to get started and how to do it. And then the late, great Toni Morrison had a fantastic quote, which I'll paraphrase, but in essence, she stated that if there's a story that you want to read, that you want to hear, and you can't find it, then you must tell it, you must write it. And that's what it is. There's a compulsion. I don't write so much because I love it, which I do, but I write because I can't not. Um, there's just so much out there, and specifically around things that I haven't been able to find in other places. It's sort of like the best way to compare it would be when you have a taste for something. You're hungry. You can go to your kitchen, you can go to a restaurant, you can find something to satiate that hunger. But when you find exactly what it was that you were craving, oh, that's a very special, very poignant type of satisfaction. And so that's what my writing is for me. It satiates that hunger for certain types of stories with certain types of protagonists and themes and narrative arcs. Um, but getting back to Rod String Nail Cloth, the reason why this was the culmination of that was that with all my other stories, they were just books. They told one story, but this is a collection. It's the Afrofuturist mixtape. There are lots of different styles of writing within this work, where there are short stories, there are character studies, there are dialogues and epistolary tales. There's a poem, which I'm going to read in just a little bit here. Captain Michaela. As a young kid, when I was younger, I was obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe. And a lot of Poe's work is in a very short medium. He writes a lot of short stories, and his poetry is incredible. I remember being in sixth grade and getting this book, 10 Great Mysteries by Edgar Allan Poe. And there was sort of an Easter egg at the end of it because it wasn't in the table of contents. But at the end, there were a handful of poems from Poe, kind of like a little extra, something like when you wait for the end credit scene nowadays in most major Hollywood movies. There's that little extra something kind of tapped on. That's what these poems felt like. One of those poems was Annabel Lee, and I just became enamored of Poe's rhythm and his style and his voicings. But I never fancied myself a poet. I never attempted poetry. I always stayed kind of solidly within the longer forms of short stories, novellas, novels, articles, and those sorts of things, lots of essays. Um, but with, yeah, Rod String Nail Cloth, since I was trying these different forms anyway, I figured this would be a great chance to tell this story through the medium of poetry. And so Captain Michaela is an Afrofuturist poem about the titular Captain Michaela, and she travels through time trying to give us a message. So I'll read it and then I'll go into a little bit more after I read it. So this is my latest book, Rod String Nail Cloth, and this is Captain Michaela. 'Twas a couple of Venusian years ago that this tale I will tell you took place, when Captain Michaela, the best in the fleet, simply vanished, not leaving a trace. Her crew was on leave when a message received warned of dire and imminent threat. And Captain Michaela tore off to the helm, and a most direct course she did set. Michaela was usually not this impulsive, but this was a most unique case. The identity code of the ominous note held a truly unsettling trait. Though encoded correctly, the sender could not be authentic, it must have been blurred. Decoding the code made Michaela's blood cold, for the signature on it was hers. The time of transmission raised much more suspicion. Michaela sat pondering how. She couldn't believe that the signal received had been sent 42 years from now. The signal source showed it had been sent from Arcturus, the fourth brightest star in Earth's sky. They'd sent many a probe, and all of them showed that nothing was out there but light. Now, the message said she was the spark of ignition, the answer to millions of questions. But authorities tainted her noble endeavors, so this was her final confession. My name is Catherine Okoye Michaela. For years I have served the fleet well. I've tried to impanel through all the right channels, no options left but to inveigle. My skills diacritic, acute and prolific, interdisciplinary glissade. Your approach paralytic, your aims parasitic, with effects that won't quickly abrade. 2,184 weeks ago, when my crew was down on the surface, I'll redirect flow until the fleet blows, and I'll have fulfilled the fleet's purpose. Calendars? Nothing but numbers and boxes, though brandished about like a sword. Dates slashing away with a reckless impertinence, forcing us all to move forward. For tomorrow comes not when the current day ends. The passage of time is illusion. That which once was could also be now. Yet we need this collective delusion. We created some metrics and markers aplenty to rein in the infinite scope of something that never was ours to begin with, nor something that we're fit to cope. The question is whether you'll ever discover the purpose of my machinations. It's unlikely you will, since you'll likely be dead by the time my work comes to fruition. In the kingdom of ours, I've witnessed the moments we attempted our futile confinement. The continuum ignores us, but also implores us to extinction and further realignment. The concept of future is merely a promise, but not made to whom you may think. Eternity is utterly far more important. We humans are just out of sync. Now, some say Michaela had merely gone crazy, while others say she was coerced. And either way, we'll never know if Michaela had saved us from something much worse. That was Captain Michaela, which is a poem from my latest book, Rod String Nail Cloth. I don't, as I mentioned before I started the excerpt, I don't really do uh, poetry that often, but I felt that in that case, having that meter, which was very heavily inspired by Poe with the rhyming and the rhythm and the flow, um, that it took the edge off what is really a dark sentiment. I mean, Michaela is sort of cursed with Cassandreic optimism, where she had been working towards a future that the powers that be seemed determined to upset and undermine, to the point that, well, because this is science fiction, a future version of herself sends a message back to her explaining that her efforts are in vain and what should she do. And in fact, it allows her to do something quite horrific by destroying the fleet to stave off something much worse, perhaps. Uh, and that's a concept I think that's thrown around now. Like a lot of things that are happening in our neighborhoods, in our city, in our country, in the world, whether it's climate change, whether it's race relations at the social political level and socioeconomic levels, things seem to be hitting a fever pitch, but that pitch never crescendos. We haven't reached the climax. Uh, and so it seems like, if is there something drastic? What if someone who has gone through everything and knows the result was able to send us a message back saying, the fight is a losing one. Your efforts are futile. What would we do with that information? Would we follow in Captain Michaela's footsteps? Would we sabotage something so great to stem off something that could be horrible? Or would we continue on knowing that everything we do on the grand scale is kind of small and almost to an infinitesimal levels? Uh, and they're not all dark. I just like Captain Michaela was one where I really liked how using that particular style in the medium of poetry and that type of poetry uh, makes something I think a lot more palatable than if I had done that as a more straightforward narrative. I think that that could be an interesting short story or novel. But I think that by keeping the poem, I was able to put a lot more in there and make the message sink in a lot faster, sort of, and increase the relatability in a way that longer prose would not have been as effective if I'd gone that route. Um, there is a lot of content out there, and I always tell anyone who ask about my process or ask about my work that if you enjoy it, thank you, because I definitely write for others to share with others. I write for myself, but I don't, you know, the reason why the book is available is because I want others to read it. Um, but I think that you should also do for yourselves as well. Like once you write, you are a writer. There is no like badge. There's no desk where you go sign up or you don't get a card or anything like that. Uh, So if you have a story within you, if you have a story that you want to hear or read but haven't been able to find, um, then just as Toni Morrison said, you must write it.